What's up? This video is about Genshin Impact TCG. Recently in the 3.3 update, they released a card game that is permanent in Genshin Impact, and I've been playing it about 10 hours a day since patch release, so about 3 days ago. And I've been pretty addicted. I've learned a lot, experimented with a few decks here and there, and I want to try explaining it to you guys in case you guys aren't familiar with the game, or if you're a new player far in the future watching this. Hopefully this video will give you a better understanding of how the game works and how it plays. And if I can explain it properly to you, it'll help me solidify my own learning experiences with it, if that makes sense. TCG is basically a 1v1 with cards, and that's it. That's literally it. It's just a card game and you're playing one other person. At the beginning, you start with 5 cards. You have the ability to redraw those 5 cards as you may choose if you don't like a specific card, but you only have 1 reroll. And after that, you get to choose your active character. Both your deck and the opponent's deck will have 30 action cards in 3 character cards. Your 3 character cards will appear on the screen and you have to choose the active character. What the active character means is that only that character can deal damage, use elemental skills, and bursts. But they are also the only character that can receive targeted damage by the opponent. So once you choose your active character, the only way you can attack with another character is if you switch to that character. After you and your opponent both choose your active character, now it's time to roll for dice. What dice are is the resource system in Genshin TCG. You use dice to play your action cards that are in your hand. You use dice to do normal attacks, elemental skills, elemental bursts. So when you both roll your dice, you roll 8 dice, and there are 8 different types of dice. 7 of them are the familiar elements we know: Anemo, Hydro, Geo, Pyro, Electro, Cryo, and I'm forgetting one. Anyways, the 7 elements, but there's one more extra element called the Omni dice, and that counts as any element. So there's 8 different types of dice total, and you roll for them. If you don't like specific dice, you do have 1 chance to re-roll your selected dice, just like the cards. Now once the cards have been chosen, the active characters have been chosen, the dice have been chosen, it's time for the first round to actually begin. First, let's go over fast actions and non-fast actions. Fast actions include using action cards, food cards, weapon cards, support cards, etc. This means your turn does not end when you use them. However, non-fast actions include switching characters and using an attack, which is a normal attack, elemental skill, or elemental burst. If you do any of those combat actions, which are not fast actions, your turn ends and it is given to the other opponent. Now, keyword, the round doesn't end, but your turn does. So let's say you do an attack. Now the turn has been handed over to the enemy. The enemy does attack, turn goes back to you, but the round doesn't end. So it's kind of like a ping pong sort of thing. The only way you can end your round is if you click, well, end round. And for the rest of the round, you can't do anything, and you get to let your opponent basically do whatever they want, or if they want to end the round too, they can end the round as well. Once both players end the round, a new round begins. Hopefully that makes sense. Turns and rounds are a little confusing at the start, but once you play, it is a bit easier to understand. Just think about, there are turns inside a round. That's probably the best way I can explain it. Let's talk about the price of these cards. If you look at an action card, at the top left, you can see the shape of the dice and a number. If the number is 1, it requires 1 dice. If the number is 2, it requires 2, and so on. And if it has 0, then yes, it does require 0 dice. You can just use it right then and there. There are different types of requirements. If you look closely, there's a white die requirement and a black die. Now, this may get confusing, but let me explain. If it's black, it requires however amount that is for any element. So let's say it's a black dice that requires 2. Black means any element. So it could be Cryo and a Hydro, it could be a Dendro and Electro, it could be 2 Omni, or an Omni dice and a Hydro dice. Doesn't matter what element it is, as long as you have 2 dice. However, if it is a white 2 die requirement, white means it has to be the same element. So it cannot be a Dendro and Hydro. It has to be 2 of the same element. So it would have to be 2 Dendros, 2 Omnis, or 2 Hydros. And the last one is a colored one. If it's an Anemo colored that requires 4, you need 4 Anemo die. Hopefully that makes sense. That's why managing your dice is very important. For your attacks, same thing, right? So your normal attack usually costs the element your character is and 2 black die. So for example, if you're Mona, you would do a normal attack using 1 Hydro die and 2 of any other elemental dice. Now let's talk about what you're actually looking at on the field. So we already know our active characters are the ones that are active, and they are pushed a bit forward on the screen so that we can see. On the left side, we have our support cards. These cards may last 1 round. They may last the entire game. or they have a specific usage. You can usually see how many usages they have at the top right, or how many stacks they have, and each support card is very different, so you'll have to read into it to understand what the stack actually means. For example, Favonius Cathedral heals 2 HP at the end of every round, and you can see how many uses it has at the top right of its support card. Now on the right side, we have summons. Summons are usually from characters. For example, if Mona does her elemental skill, she summons whatever the hell this thing is. And in this case, it gives her -1 damage received, as well as does 1 damage to the other opponent's active character at the end of a round, which is pretty nice. So support cards on the left side and summons are on the right, and they all have their own stacks / amounts of usages as well. Now let's talk about bursts. The burst usually requires 2 charges or 3, and you can see how many charges you have or energy points you have on the right side of your character card. It will glow and light up. Your burst will require a specific amount of your character's element dice, as well as the max amount of energy points. Before we continue to elemental reactions, just want to quickly go over food cards. You can only use 1 food card on a character per round. Once you use it, they'll have the, the little full icon. Oh, don't feed me anymore, I'm gonna explode. You can't really spam a food card on someone. So reactions in the Genshin TCG are somewhat similar to reactions in the actual game, but there are a few differences. I will leave a link in the description for a chart of what the reactions actually do. Most of them do either +2 damage when it's created, +1, maybe create some kind of buff that lasts maybe 3 or 2 times for your active character, and if you switch your active character, that buff will go towards your next one as well. It's a lot to take in. I'm not going to explain it all here because we're mostly trying to understand the flow of the game. So if you want the technical details of that, you can click the link in the description below. But for the most part, for elemental reactions, if your active character does like hydro damage on the other opponent, and then later in the round, if you end up switching to a pyro character, if you do pyro damage to that same enemy character you did hydro to, well, an elemental reaction will occur. And in this case, vaporize. So it's pretty similar to the in-game actual reactions. For the most part, those are the bare minimum basics of how TCG works and its mechanics. I'll also leave a more advanced rule set in the link in the description below. Credit to the authors, they've worked extremely hard putting together a huge document of all the info you need. I'm just a guy that shares info because I hope everyone can find this info useful, especially if you are starting TCG or just want to get a better grasp at it.